Geez, after that music, I expect armies of the undead to become marching out.
That's right. Good evening, one and all, and welcome to Seven Kinds of Mischief. I'm your host, Stone Loki. Good evening, everyone, and big good evening to Adega Outlaw. How are you doing, my brother?
Not bad, not bad. How you doing? How you doing?
I am doing
I can't do that
all
right.
How are you? Oh, my Lord. Oh, man. I'm trying to get my damn computer to work right at the moment. I'm trying to get all my there we go. There we go. Okay.
All set now. Got it? You sure?
I got it. I should be now when we're ready. When we are ready. Yes, that should work. Yes. All right.
There it is.
Good evening, everyone. Really quickly, Arwen Avalon. Good evening to the lady, Arwen Avalon. Purple Valkyrie. Hello, Purple Valkyrie. Mark the Infinitely Tired. Dave G Sound. Snort of Pufus Cuber. Hello, Mark the Infinitely Tired. How are you doing, brother? Canadian Spider-Man. Hail. How are you? Fire Knight 013. Good evening. Leia Rose. Good evening. Hope you all are having a wonderful evening tonight. An extra special. I hope you guys have had a great day today on this Thursday. It is almost Friday. We are almost to Friday. Friday. Psychodor 9. Good evening, brother. Yeah, it's Friday. Yeah. Andrew 46 and 2. Good evening, everybody. Pat S. Good evening. And we're going to have one heck of a show tonight. So what have you got for us tonight, brother? What have you got? I see all these pictures of these people, and I'm like, what the heck is Adega got?
Right. I'm actually going to do a tad bit of history that is old history. And last week, someone had said something about, I bring up these things about government, it was vaccines or different things where it's in our face and how terrifying it is. And someone kind of said they liked it better when I told other things. And I'm not going to do it that way. Occasionally I will. Sometimes I'll share things. You guys that have been around long enough know I pull things from history, current events, conspiracies, all the different stuff that I can prove that's true.
And right off the bat, Psychodorf 9 with $5 super chat says, Adega, you know what we call armies of undead? A target-rich environment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Psychodorf 9.
Just make sure you have at least 30,000 rounds of ammo per weapon. That's the...
Yes.
Let's see. The survivalist motto. One of them, anyway. All right. The ugly guy we see before you is part of a family, we'll kind of say. Some of you may know bits and pieces of this story. There's been a lot of other stories and copycats that have happened. One of which someone had mentioned that I do their story once upon a time about a guy who had a hotel and he did some horrible things in the hotel, and that later became American Horror Story Hotel. But this one goes back even further, and we're going to talk about it. Or actually, I'm going to talk about it, read about it, and you guys will hopefully enjoy hearing a little bit of really morbid history. In the 19th century, Kansas was a bloody place, especially before the Civil War, as free soilers and slave advocates duked it out for control of the new territory. Once Kansas declared itself with the Union and the Civil War began to rage, the bloody battles continued. After the Civil War, as pioneers began to head westward along the many trails through Kansas, murder and mayhem persisted as hardened men from the battlefields. My mistake. Let me get my glasses on so I stop doing that. Hardened men from the battlefield, grown used to the violence, continued their violent ways along the overland trails and in the many cow towns. If not accosted by road agents, travelers also had to be concerned about Indian attacks. Southeast Kansas in particular was known as a rough area. Though most of us know of Dodge City's wicked ways, the deadly gunfights of the Daltons and the Coifeville, you could probably pronounce it better than I can, and the many outlaws and gunfighters who spent time in the Sunflower State, few are aware of a family of mass murderers living a supposed quiet life near the small town of Cherryvale. Just after the Civil War ended, the United States government moved the Osage Indians from the Labette County in southeast Kansas to the new Indian Territory in what would later become the state of Oklahoma. The vacated lands was then made available for homesteaders, who for the first part were a group of hardworking pioneers farming the area's softly rolling hills and windswept prairies. In 1870, 5 families of spiritualists settled in western Labette County, about 7 miles northeast of where Cherryville would be platted a year later. One of these families was the Benders, comprised of John Bender, Sr., his wife, Almira, son John Jr., and daughter Kate. A cult-like group, the family chose from several available claims and began to make their homes. John Bender Sr. chose a 160-acre section of western slopes of the mounds that today continue to bear their name. The property was located directly on the Osage Mission Independence Trail that operated from Independence to Fort Scott. His son chose a narrow piece of land just north of his father's. However, he never lived on it, nor made any improvements. The family soon built a small one-room framed cabin, a barn, a cooler, and dug a well. Inside the wooden cabin, the area was partitioned with a large canvas, creating living quarters in the back and a small inn and store in the front. A crude sign was hung above the front door that advertised groceries to the many travelers along the Osage Trail. The little store carried a few supplies such as powder, shot, groceries, liquor, tobacco, sold meals, and provided a safe overnight resting place for the strangers along the road. Keeping mostly to themselves, the Benders appeared to simply be struggling homesteaders who worked hard to earn their living like the other pioneers. Immigrating from Germany, John Bender Sr. was 60 years old, who had arrived in the area. His wife was about 55. Standing over 6 feet tall, John was a giant of a man who, because of his piercing black eyes set deeply under huge brushy brow, earned him the nickname of Old Beetle Brown John. His ruddy face, mostly covered by a heavy beard, sullen expression, and long hair, often led to him being described as a wild and woolly-looking man. Both John and his raw-boned wife spoke such guttural. Now, raw-boned means kind of battle-hardened, tough. Spoke with such guttural accents that few people could understand them. Mrs. Bender, a heavy-set woman, was so unfriendly and had such sinister eyes that her neighbors began to call her a she-devil. To add to her fierce look, Ma Bender also claimed to be a medium who could speak with the dead and boiled herbs and roots that she declared it could be used to cast common or wicked spells. Her husband and son were said to have feared her as she ran the household with an iron hand. John Bender Jr. was a tall, slender man of 25 who was handsome with auburn hair and a mustache. Speaking English fluently with a German accent, he was said to have been social, but he was prone to laughing aimlessly, which led many people to think of him as being a half-wit. Daughter Kate was the friendliest of the bunch, speaking good English with just a slight accent and bore cultivated social skills. A beautiful girl, about 23, she was quick to laugh and to talk to strangers. She and her brother John often attended Sunday school at a nearby Harmony Grove and were readily accepted in the community. Kate was a self-proclaimed healer and psychic, gave lectures on spiritualism, and conducted seances. She also claimed to possess psychic powers, including the ability to communicate with the dead. Disturbing circulars that proclaimed her skills included supernatural powers and the ability to cure illness and infirmities. She soon found the lecture circuit profitable. The petite auburn-haired beauty had a desire for notoriety and often advocated free love and justification for murder in her lectures. Along with her desire for fame, she also craved wealth and position. Though her beauty and skill gained her popularity with the locals, her actions began to cause them to say that she was satanic. It was to be this diminutive Bender family member that would take most of the blame for what was soon to be found out about this infamous family. When the Benders opened the store in 1871, many travelers would stop for a meal or supplies. However, some of those men who frequently carried large sums of cash with the intention of settling, buying stock, or purchasing a claim began to go missing. When friends and family began to look for them, they could trace them as far as Big Hill County of the southeast Kansas before they could find no trace of the lost traveler. These first few missing travelers did not raise an overall alarm in the area, as it was not uncommon during those days for men to simply continue their journey westward. However, as more time passed, the disappearances became more frequent, and by the spring of 1873, the region had become strife with rumors, and travelers began to avoid the trail. When neighboring communities started to make slanderous insinuations, the Osage Township called a meeting held at the Harmony Grove Schoolhouse in March to see what, if anything, could be done. About 75 people attended the gathering, including both Bender men. The discussion began regarding the 10 people who were reported missing, including a well-known independence physician named Dr. William H. York. With the full realization that there truly was a major problem in their township, the group decided to search every farmstead between Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek. When most of the attendees volunteered their premises searched, the Benders remained silent. Sometime later, Billy Toll, a neighbor of the Benders, noticed that the Benders' inn was abandoned and their farm animals unfed. Toll reported the news to Leroy F. Dick of the township trustee, and a search party was soon formed, which included Dr. York's brother, Colonel A.M. York of Fort Scott. When the men arrived at the property, they found the cabin empty of food, clothing, and personal possessions. They were also met by a terrible smell inside the abandoned inn. The trap door, nailed shut, was discovered in the floor of the cabin. Prying it open, the men found a 6-foot-deep hole that was filled with clotted blood, causing the terrible odor. However, there were no bodies in the hole. Finally, the men physically moved the entire cabin to the side and began to search beneath, but no bodies were found there either. Continuing, they began to dig around the cabin, especially in an area that the Benders had utilized as a vegetation garden and orchard. At the site of a freshly stirred depression in the earth, they found the first body, buried headward down, with his feet scarcely covered. The corpse was that of Dr. William H. York, his skull bludgeoned and his throat cut from ear to ear. The digging continued the next day, and 9 other bodies and numerous dismembered body parts were found, including a woman and a little girl. The burial site was christened Hell's Half Acre, And another brother, another brother of Dr. York, a lawyer and state senator residing in Independence, offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to the Bender family arrest. On May 17th, Governor Thomas Osborne added to that amount by offering another $2,000 reward for the apprehension of all four. Word of the gruesome murders spread fast, and thousands of people flocked to the site, including news reporters from as far away as New York and Chicago. The Bender cabin was ripped apart by gruesome souvenir hunters, right down to the bloody bricks that lined the cellar. Bit by bit, the story of the Benders was pieced together. The Benders were obviously not what they appeared. In fact, they weren't even a true family. The only ones related were Ma and Kate Bender. When the visitors stopped in for a meal, they were seated at a table with their backs to the large canvas that separated the inn from the living quarters. Then Kate would begin to charm the men with her social skills, flirting or revealing her psychic gifts. As the men gave their full attention to the alluring Kate, Pa and John Bender, hiding behind the canvas, would strike the unsuspecting traveler in the skull with a hammer. Ma Bender and Kate would then rife the body for money, pushing them through the trap door into the hole below, where Kate would slit their throats. During the night, the body would then be buried in the garden behind the house. Their downfall was the murder of a father and daughter named Lonker, and that of Dr. William York, who had come looking for the missing pair. In the winter of 1872, Mr. Lonker and his daughter had left Independence for Iowa, but were never heard from again. In the spring of 1873, Dr. York took it upon himself to go looking for the Lonkers, stopping at the homestead along the trail to ask questions. Though he reached Fort Scott unscathed and started to return to Independence about March 8th, he never reached home. Dr. York had two brothers, one living in Scott and the other one in Independence. Both knew of his travel plans and he failed to return home. An all-out search began for the missing doctor. Colonel York, leading a contingency of some 50 men, began to question every traveler along the trail and to stop at an area homestead. One of these places was the Bender Inn. The Benders tried to help by admitting that Dr. York had stopped by at the place, but convinced the search party that he had left and was probably waylaid by Indians. Even Kate, with her clairvoyant abilities, attempted to search for the missing doctor to throw off any suspicions. After Colonel York's visit and the meeting at the Harmony Grove schoolhouse, the Bender family fled. It was only a few days later that the homestead was found abandoned and the search party began to discover the grisly remains of the bodies. The diggers were astonished to find what they became to known as America's first mass murder burial grounds, as body after body was uncovered. 10 bodies were found in the Bender's apple orchard, including Dr. York and the people he had been searching for, Mr. Lonker and his daughter, just 7 years of age. More gruesomely, though, the little girl's body was found to have multiple injuries. None of them would have caused her death, and it was speculated that the poor lass may have been buried alive. Of the discovery of her remains, the Kansas City Times reported the little girl was probably 8 years of age and had long, sunny hair and some traces of beauty on her countenance that was not yet entirely disfigured by decay. One arm was broken. The breastbone had been driven in. The knee had been wrenched from its socket and the leg doubled up under the body. Nothing like this sickening series of crimes had ever been recorded in the whole of the history of the country. Other bodies found in the garden were those of Henry Mackenzie, mutilated remains, 3 men by the name of Ben Brown, W.F. McCauty, and John Geary, as well as an unidentified male and female. John Boyle's body was found in the well. Dismembered parts of several other victims were also discovered, but could never be identified. 4 other bodies were with crushed skulls and slit throats were also found outside the property in Drum Creek and the surrounding prairies. For all these deaths, the Benders gained only about $4,600, 2 teams of horses and a wagon, a pony, and a saddle. Because some of the travelers were carrying nothing of value, it was widely suspected that the Benders killed simply for the bloody thrill of it. As word of the grisly murders spread, more and more travelers came forward to tell their own stories of narrow escape, including one gentleman by the name of William Pickering. When he refused to sit with his back to the canvas because of disgusting stains, Pickering said that Kate Bender threatened him with a knife, at which point he fled the premises. A Catholic priest said that he too fled when he saw one of the Bender men concealing a large hammer. After following a fresh trail of wagon tracks, a search party found that the Benders had gone to the town of nearby Thayer, some 12 miles to the north. There they purchased tickets on the northbound Leavenworth, Lawrence, and Galveston trails to Humboldt. Several days later, the Bender teams and wagons were found a short distance away, their horses nearly starved. Upon further investigation, Captain James B. Ransom, the train's conductor, said that John Jr. and Kate disembarked at Shantuck and took the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad south to Red River County near the Denison, Texas, which then was terminus of the railroad. Allegedly, the pair then fled to the outlaw colony along the border of Texas and New Mexico. Meanwhile, Ma and Pa Bender continued on the train north to Kansas City, where it was believed that they transferred to a train headed to St. Louis. Attempts to capture the bloodthirsty family were immediately made by both law and vigilantes alike. Though no one ever collected on the rewards offered, rumors began to fly of several parties who had captured and killed the Benders. One vigilante group claimed to have shot down the men and Ma Bender and buried Kate alive, as the witch they believed her to be. Another group claimed that they had caught the Benders while escaping to the south and lynched them before throwing their bodies into the Vagris River. Yet another group claimed to have killed the Benders during a gunfight and buried their bodies on the prairie. However, none of these tales were ever confirmed. No bodies found, so most thought that the Benders had managed to escape. For years, sightings of Ma Bender and Kate were reported, and in 1889, 2 women were actually extradited from Michigan on the charge. Though the pair were jailed, the case was eventually dropped for lack of evidence. Of the family, Pa Bender was actually found to have been a man named John Flickering from either Germany or Holland, though he allegedly committed suicide in 1884 in Lake Michigan. Others believe that Ma and Kate murdered him because he had fled Cherryville with all the cash and valuables they had taken from their victims. Ma Bender was born Elmira Mayak in the, one of you English people would probably know this better than I do, Adirondacks, and married as a teenager to a man named George Griffith. After bearing him a dozen children, including Kate, Mr. Griffith suddenly died, some said of a bad place in his head, resembling a dent that might be made with a hammer. Afterward, she reportedly remarried several times, killing those men too, as well as 3 of her older children, so they couldn't testify against her. You notice how this story is repeated over and over again? You even have a Disney ride with the axe murder lady who killed 7 husbands. Anyway, John Jr. was actually found to have been a man named John Gedhart. His habit of laughing aimlessly was what led to people believe that he was half-witted, though many afterward believed this was simply a ruse to disguise his clever nature. Though most were led to believe that John and Kate were sister and brother, others said that they sometimes passed as man and wife. The two were known to have had a relationship, and further tales abounded that when Kate became pregnant, they would simply bash in the baby's head once it was born. After, after the Benders' escape, one detective who had closely followed all the leads said that he had traced Gedhart to the Outlaw County along the Texas-New Mexico border, where he had found that the criminal had died of apoplexy. Kate was the fifth child of Ma Bender and was born as Eliza Griffith. At some point, she married and went by the name of Sarah Eliza Davis. Allegedly, while working at the Bender Inn, she also earned her keep as a prostitute, adding an additional amount to the traveler's bill for the privilege of laying with her. In the end, it was Kate who was primarily blamed for the numerous bloody murders that, even at her young age, was the inspiration for the crimes. Though the tales of what happened to the Benders can only be speculated as to their accuracy, the fact that 10 bodies were found on the property is not in dispute. Other corpses found in the area as well, as many mysterious disappearances of the other lonely travelers led to the locals to believe that the Benders actually killed more than 20 people. The sensational tales and rumors of the Benders continued well into the 20th century, but as to what actually happened to them remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the Old West. The story goes on to talk about how they set up museums and hauntings, as you would expect in the area. Now there's actually a fire station that sits on top of where their home used to be. But this story, as you can well guess, has been the inspiration for many, many other stories that we now watch from movies and television, other things. But this is the origins.
You know, before I start, I've just got to say, she looks exactly like the first girlfriend I ever had, and her name was Katie. Tell me that's not fucking weird. Tell me that's not fucking weird.
We keep doing that, don't we? All these connections in our stories.
Purple says there's a film about this called Bender from 2016. Never heard of it, but might check it out. I'm definitely going to do that now that I know about this. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. Little history lesson.
Absolutely crazy. I love those. I love those. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read a story called AM 1060. And I'm going to throw it into the chat just in case you want to read along. There is the link in chat if you would like to read along tonight. So, it was a normal, boring night. Driving home from my night shift at the factory. Bleary-eyed and half asleep, I drove home. Unable to wait for that moment when I would get home, crawl into bed next to my wife. And for that moment when my head hit the pillow, I would drift off to sleep. It had been a rather uneventful night at work where, again, I just kind of went through the motions. To pass the time on my 40-minute drive home, I would usually turn on the radio and listen to some music. This night was no different than the others, except for the fact that I had trouble finding a good station to listen to. There were plenty of channels that usually played a vast array of music that I enjoyed, but they were seemingly all at commercial. Selling life insurance, roofing services, medication I didn't need or want. I was starting to lose hope, figuring that this may end up being a pretty silent ride home, when I came upon a rather peculiar AM radio station, AM 1060. Strange, I thought, that in all my years of driving home late at night, pursuing the radio station for some kind of music, I'd never come across this particular one before, or even heard of it for that matter. It didn't start off being all that unusual. In fact, it started off with some pretty solid classic rock, Led Zeppelin. The station was kind of grainy, but not unbearably so. So after Kashmir finished, A DJ who didn't identify himself brought on a guest to talk about several current events. Now, talk radio isn't really my first choice for radio programming, but whatever, I thought. There really isn't much of anything else on. And after they're done talking, it'll be back to the rock, right? Well, this night would prove to be the first of many nights in which I had a strange encounter with AM 1060. For about 15 minutes of mostly unengaging talk about politics, the broadcast was interrupted by a set of three short beeps, followed by a couple of seconds of static. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a monotone voice began to read off names and dates. John Telfer, born November 14th, 1953, missing January 9th, 1992. Joanne Wilkerson, born March 11th, 1937, date missing August 2nd, 2001. Jerome Castor, born December 3rd, 1984, date missing September 6th, 1999. After the third missing persons report, there was again a low rumble of static, followed by those beeps. Then it went back to normal. After that, I just turned the radio off and drove the rest of the way home in silence. Just couldn't shake what had happened, and to be some kind of mistake, right? Some type of radio interference, or maybe just some elaborate prank. I don't know. If it was a prank, though, who were they attempting to prank at 5:37 in the morning? The next day at work, the previous night's events were still very fresh in my mind. I decided to ask my coworker if they've ever even heard of AM 1060. They said they hadn't, and that they mostly kept at the FM stations. They then chided me for being an old timer, whilst reassuring me they all lived in the present. Whatever I thought, it was probably bullshit anyway. 5 o'clock rolled around quickly that night. I clocked out, hopped in my truck, and began to drive home. I listened to my regular rotation of rock radio stations that night, rocked out to some good songs, even heard some Mott the Hoppy. Haven't heard them in a while. However, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went searching for AM 1060. So I flipped over to the AM stations and tried to find it, but for whatever reason, I couldn't. I went through it several times, but to no avail. I found AM 1040, which was pretty much just static, and AM 2000, which turned out to be a country music station, but no AM 1060. I scanned all the radio stations 4 times over, but nothing. Whatever, I thought. I switched back to the FM stations and rocked out the rest of the way home. Never thought too much about it. Just a fluke, I figured. Later on that day, I asked my wife if she had come across this mysterious radio station. She just gave me a confused look, and understandably so, since in our 20 years of marriage, I never asked her anything about an AM radio station out of the blue. She inquired as to why I asked. I played it off with some coy response about how it played some of the music she liked. She shrugged it off and thanked me for the suggestion. It's about a week before I had my second encounter with AM 1060. Just like the last time, I was driving home from work in the wee hours of the morning and searching for a radio station. Couldn't seem to find anything I wanted to listen to, so while sifting through radio stations, I stumbled upon it again. In the middle of its spiel, I heard the same nearly robotic voice rattling off names and dates. Armando Gonzalez, born July 18th, 1982, date missing, April 23rd, 2013. Why were these being broadcast, I thought? Is it an effort to find these people? If so, don't we need a little more information than that? Van Davis, born February 4th, 1911, date missing October 13th, 1945. 1945. What the hell are the odds that that person is even still alive? Is that person honestly still being searched for? Sofia Andujar, born January 1st, 1995. Date missing January 1st, 2013. Maria Devois Kane, born June 29th, 1963. Date missing November 28th, 2007. Right after the last date was mentioned, the radio station crackled back into its regular broadcast. Sounded like the same DJ as last time talking to a guest, this time about recent economic issues. I have to say, when it's not rattling off names, birth dates, and the dates people went missing, It was really a fucking boring station. When I woke up from my afternoon nap around 10 a.m., I decided to try out my amateur sleuthing skills. I went and got my wife's laptop, opened it up, and began Googling the names I'd heard on the radio. First, though, I looked up AM 1060. To my surprise, they had a website. I clicked on the link, and after a bit longer than usual, a 404 error message displayed. Figures. I tried refreshing the page several times, not sure what good I thought it was going to do. I quickly gave up on that venture and went on Googling the names. First name I typed in the search engine was Maria Dubois Kane, and sure enough, there she was. She was, in fact, born on June of 1963 and last seen in November of 2007 in Helena, Montana. Helena, Montana. That's nowhere near here. What are the odds that someone who went missing in Montana is all the way down here? They honestly think someone down this way has details about her whereabouts? It left so many questions. Next, I looked up John Telfer. Again, the information I had about him was in fact accurate. But he too was from an area that I would assume was well outside the range of AM 1060. What the hell was going on? After looking over their stories, as well as several others, I compiled some information on them and realized that all these missing people were from places that weren't anywhere near me, with the exception of one man who disappeared from a few towns over. I also noticed a certain very interesting synchronicity in which these cases, all of them, disappeared while driving. Even Jerome Castor wasn't even old enough to have a driver's license at the time of his disappearance. And their last known whereabouts were usually places they frequented, places such as their home or work. So they were just going about their normal daily lives and poof, vanished without a trace. Were they all going somewhere? Or worse yet, were they all running from something? It was then that my wife entered the kitchen where I sat doing my research. She asked me what I was doing. Seeing that I had several tabs open and was looking up old articles, came up with this excuse about being interested in true crime and having heard about some missing person cases that were exceptionally enthralling. She then pointed to one of my tabs and asked why it was open. Stupid me forgot to close out the website for AM 1060. Told her that I had been listening to it on the way home and heard about some contest they were having in which the winner would get 2 free tickets to see Lady Gaga, and that I was trying to win them for us. She thanked me, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and then headed out the door on her way to work. It would be nearly a month and a half before I came across AM 1060 again. And to be honest, I had nearly forgotten about it altogether. This time, however, was different from the previous 2 occasions, and that I wasn't on my way home from work. Rather, I had just left my house on my way to a camping trip with a couple of my old high school buddies. Sheila Gaston, I heard the voice of the radio say. Born September 12, 1970. Date missing, February 29, 2004. George Wellington Worth, born unknown, 1604. Date missing, unknown, 1655. There was no way they kept records of that kind of thing back then. Also, there is no chance that that guy would still be alive. Jeffrey Morris Jr., born August 21st, 1993. Date missing, May 27th, 2031. That hadn't happened yet. Did the person just misspeak? Was it a typo? There's no way that this station could predict the future now. At this point, I would believe just about anything. Once at our campsite, my friends and I had a relatively normal weekend. We fished, drank, sat around talking about your standard fare of guy shit. You know, women, sports, that kind of thing. But I just couldn't stop thinking about this whole thing with the radio station. So finally, after several beers, I asked if any of my friends had heard of AM 1060. Greg thought that he might have seen a billboard for it off the highway once. Other than that minor contribution, nothing else was said about it that night. and I let it be. The following morning, however, was a different story. While on a hike through the woods, my friend Terry took me aside and asked me what I knew about AM 1060. Told him that it was a classic rock station that I liked, that occasionally had some interesting talk segments. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow, an overall suspicious look on his face. I could tell he didn't believe me. When he spoke again, he told me that he thought he was familiar with the station, but not because it played good music, but more so because a former coworker of his used to be really obsessed with that station, which he found odd because he could never find it on the radio in his car. I thought, no big deal. I can't always find it myself. Asked him what happened to his coworker. He said he didn't know, and that the guy just kind of stopped showing up for work one day. That caught my attention. I hoped I wouldn't end up like that. Terry then voiced his concern that he believed something nefarious was at play. I told him, don't worry about it, and that everything would be fine. I wasn't that into the station. I just liked their assortment of classic rock songs. That was it. Terry then brought something else to my attention, which was that while he thought it was anything but abnormal to like a radio station that played the type of music you like, his former coworker claimed to really like its selection of old school hip hop, not rock. I just figured that maybe the station used to play hip hop and left well enough alone. I mean, radio station changing up its programming from one type of music to another over the course of time is anything but unheard of. Then went on to explain that from time to time, his coworkers started to become more and more disorderly and uncouth. I assured him that I was in no way acting out of character and that there was nothing to worry about. This seemed to de escalate the conversation to a good stopping point. That was the last we talked about at that trip. The rest of the trip went off without a hitch, but I could tell something was deeply bothering Terry. When I got home from my camping trip 3 days later, I went straight to researching the names I had heard. Found out that all of them went missing in the exact same manner as the previous people, except for George Wellington, who went missing well before cars were invented. However, the research I did on him turned out to be one of the most fruitful. It was tough, as you can imagine, to dig up information on someone who lived so long ago. What I learned about him really stuck with me. First, he was an Englishman. Second, that he was viewed as something of a social pariah. Apparently, he was seen as the town nuisance. Allegedly, he heard noises in his head that he described as being a fuzzy ruckus. One night, after having yet another one of these episodes, he gathered up some of his belongings, put them into a stagecoach, and set off into the night. No one ever saw or heard from him ever again. How weird is that? That even though he lived well before the invention of the automobile, or the radio for that matter, his story was strangely congruent to all the other people mentioned on the AM 1060. Just his was the 17th century. Just then, my wife came downstairs in a hurry. She was late for work. She saw me sitting on the couch using a laptop again. She half jokingly asked me if I was trying to win her more tickets. I sheepishly said that I was, having forgotten that was the lie I was using to go with to explain my sudden and strange change of habits. What happened next, however, left me very confused. Right before she left, she told me that she had listened to AM 1060 on her way home from work. Fearing the worst, I readied a cockamamie explanation as to why all she heard was either static talk radio, rock music, or worse yet, missing people reports. Before she said that I was right, and that it did have a really good selection of pop and R&B music. I had never heard any pop or R&B on that station. Station is by nature rather animalistic. This threw me for a loop. Is this station different things to different people? Following night, I was driving home from work when I turned on the radio. I flipped over to AM 1060 and only to hear complete and utter silence. This was new, I thought. As I was about to change the station, I got a call. I answered the phone. It was Terry. No idea why he was calling me this early, but whatever. We chatted for a couple of minutes talking about this and that. When almost as if he had a telekinetic power, he asked if I was currently listening to AM 1060. I lied and said I wasn't. although there was nothing currently playing on that channel, so I guess it wasn't a total lie. He said he was just making sure, and laid his theory on me that the radio station was pure evil. I laughed because while I found the station intriguing at best and somewhat perturbing at worst, I highly doubted it was run by the devil. Topic quickly changed to that of work. Apparently, another person from Terry's work quit that week. Right after telling me that, a sudden urge came over me. I asked him what the name of his coworker, who had become enraptured by AM 1060, was. He said that his coworker went by the name Manny, but that his real name was Armando Gonzalez. I quickly found an excuse to end the call with Terry, spinning some story about pulling into the drive-thru to grab a bite to eat before I got home. I assured him I'd call him later. We hung up, and almost like clockwork, the second I hung up, music began to fade in over the radio. This time started off innocently enough, beginning with a song, that song being My Favorite Waste of Time by Alan Paul. I chuckled to myself. How appropriate, I thought. Since this radio station truly had become something of my favorite waste of time these past couple of months. As the song petered out, static faded in, and then came the three beeps. Here we go again, I said aloud. Then came something I definitely was not expecting. Something that made my blood run ice cold. James Ager, born April 10th, 1961. Date missing, August 17th, 2016. That's my name and my birthday. And today is August 17th, 2016.
I like that one. You didn't know if it was going to be his wife, his buddy's work partner. It's just, yeah, I like that one.
Yes, absolutely. That was that. I love that. I love that. So we got missing people, and we got missing people. It happened again, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my God, that was fun. That was fun.
Psychodorf brought something up, and I don't know if I did it here or I did it with Fordian. The time skip. Did I ever talk about time skip here?
Mm-mm.
All right, because I almost did that tonight. I may bring up some time skips sometime soon. Interesting stuff, really bizarre. A lot of it happens in England, more than anywhere that's recorded. There's a certain street in London where it happens all the time. Some very credible things, but I may have to do that one of these weeks. That was cool.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, Adega. Thank you for doing this with me, and thank you, chat, for hanging out with us and listening to this. Thank you very much. Catman DD Myers, thank you for being here, brother. I know you can't make it in the mornings, but thank you for being here tonight. I really do appreciate it. Lady Mist, hello, Lady Mist. She says, Loki, Adega, thank you for the fun stories. Everyone take care and have a wonderful evening. You as well.
You too.
Our guardian of the void, Lady Mist. Thank you so very much. Arwen Avalon, never seen a werewolf with a microphone for a head, but it's terrifying.
Oh, Siren Head. I hate that thing.
Chris Berger, thank you. Loki and Adega for another great night. Spooky stream from Arwen Avalon. Thank you guys so very much. Thank you, Trinoculus B. Thank you all very much. You guys have a great night. We will be back tomorrow with some space above and beyond. But until then, be excellent to each other. Have a great one. And thank you all for being here tonight.
Good night.
These videos are tremendous. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hammer that notification bell.